They slammed her against the cold metal wall as if she were a criminal. The irony? She was the one in charge of keeping the nation safe. The officers didn't know her name, didn't care who she was, and didn't even stop to ask. To them, she was just another black woman in an expensive suit at the airport, suspicious by skin alone. Her name was Dr. Elaine Porter, 43 years old, Harvard-educated, the daughter of civil rights activists, and now the sitting Secretary of Homeland Security of the United States. But in that moment, none of that mattered. The weight of their hands on her arms, the stares of passengers whispering behind their phones, the sharp zip of handcuffs against her wrists, all of it collapsed her identity into one shallow stereotype. A black body in the wrong place at the wrong time. Elaine had flown through airports countless times, but today was different. She had just returned from an international security summit, her mind still humming with conversations about terrorism, immigration, and the fragile state of global unity. She carried classified reports in her briefcase, her phone filled with encrypted calls from world leaders, her calendar booked with meetings that would shape the safety of millions. Yet as she approached the TSA checkpoint, she felt the weight of eyes on her, the silent suspicion clinging to her skin like smoke. The officer's gaze lingered too long. She offered her passport, her government ID, her boarding pass. Still, he frowned, as if the documents in his hand and the woman standing before him could not possibly belong to the same reality. She was too polished, too confident, too black. Elaine noticed the change in his posture before he spoke, the subtle signal he gave to the other officers. A second man approached, his hand hovering near his holster, his jaw tight. Elaine's pulse quickened not from guilt, but from a lifetime of recognition. She knew what was coming. "Step aside, ma'am," the officer said, his voice sharp, designed to be heard by the surrounding crowd. The words weren't a request. They were a performance. Passengers slowed their steps, dragging their carry-ons, curious for a show. Phones tilted upward, recording. Elaine's lips parted, ready to assert herself, to remind them of the authority she carried. But before she could speak, the officers flanked her. Their hands were firm, not violent yet, but purposeful. They pulled her away from the line, away from the rhythm of travel, into the fluorescent limbo of a side room. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. A camera blinked red from the ceiling corner. One officer barked questions. "Where are you going? Why are you here? Who paid for your ticket?" The absurdity of the interrogation might have been comical if it weren't so cruel. Elaine answered calmly, her voice steady, though each word tasted like rust. She explained her role, her position, her reason for travel. They laughed. One leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking as if she were auditioning for a role she'd never win. "Secretary of Homeland Security? Lady, if that's true, I'm the president of Mars." The room erupted with a cruel chuckle. Elaine stared at them, her silence heavier than any accusation. She thought of her father, once dragged from his car in Alabama for driving home too late at night. She thought of her mother, spat on for sitting at the front of a bus. And now here she was, a generation later, in the very country her parents had fought to reshape, bound by the same chains of perception. The humiliation deepened when they demanded she unlock her briefcase. Inside were files stamped classified, documents that only top clearance could touch. Her pulse raced if they opened them carelessly, if they mishandled the contents. The implications could ripple through international relations. She warned them firmly, reminding them of protocol, of chain of custody. Again, they laughed. To them, she was a liar desperate to escape. Meanwhile, in the terminal outside, the news had begun to spread. Whispers carried from gate to gate, from phone screen to phone screen. A woman in handcuffs. A black woman in a suit. Someone tweeted, "Crazy scene at JFK. They just dragged off some lady who said she was Homeland Security Secretary LOL." The post began to spread, comments flooding with both mockery and suspicion. But in Washington, D.C., alarms were going off. Elaine's scheduled motorcade was waiting at the other end of her flight. Her staff checked the flight tracker. Hours ticked by. Calls went unanswered. Then, a junior aide scrolling Twitter went pale. The viral video was shaky but clear enough. Elaine, their boss, cuffed and cornered by airport police. The aide's hand trembled as she dialed the emergency line reserved for government security incidents. Back in the interrogation room, one officer pressed closer, his voice laced with mock authority. "You think just because you talk fancy, we're supposed to believe you? Lady, people like you don't run this country. You don't get to walk through here like you own the place." Elaine's jaw tightened. She had endured sexism, racism, condescension, but rarely so condensed, so raw. For a moment, she imagined tearing the badge from her pocket, slamming it on the table, demanding respect. But she held back. She wanted them to finish writing their own script of injustice before the curtain fell. Because she knew the curtain was about to fall. At that exact moment, the door swung open. A new presence filled the room. A tall agent in a dark suit, earpiece glinting beneath his cropped hair. His eyes scanned the scene, the cuffs, the officers, the secretary sitting still but burning with quiet fury. He didn't hesitate. "Release her. Now." The room froze. One officer scoffed, ready to argue. But the agent stepped forward, his badge flashing, Secret Service. The words on it were unignorable. "You just unlawfully detained the Secretary of Homeland Security." The laughter drained from the room like water down a sink. Silence. The officers' faces turned pale, their mouths opening and closing without sound. Elaine rose slowly, her composure regal, her dignity intact despite the bruises on her wrists. She looked each officer in the eye, her gaze a mirror of their own shame. "Do you know what the true threat to this country is?" she said softly, her voice sharper than any scream. "It's not the enemies beyond our borders. It's the prejudice right here at home." The words hung heavy in the air. And outside that room, the golden light of the terminal still poured through the windows, as if refusing to let the darkness win. Elaine stepped out of the room into the blinding brightness of the terminal, her wrists still red from the cuffs. The murmur of the crowd rolled toward her like a wave, whispers and gasps blending with the rustle of luggage wheels. People parted instinctively, some embarrassed by what they had witnessed, others craning their necks to see the woman who had just been revealed as one of the most powerful figures in the country. Phones lifted again, but this time the angle had changed. It was no longer the spectacle of a black woman being dragged through an airport. It was the image of resilience, a leader emerging from humiliation with her head held high. The Secret Service agent flanked her, his face grim, his voice low in her ear. "Madam Secretary, your car is waiting. We'll debrief in D.C." Elaine nodded but did not hurry. Each step she took was deliberate, measured, as if claiming the floor of the terminal itself. She could feel the eyes on her, but she didn't shrink from them. She carried the shame they had tried to heap on her and transformed it into weight for her stride, armor for her spirit. Behind her, the officers lingered, pale and trembling. They knew what was coming. Investigations. Careers ruined. Headlines that would burn their names into history not as protectors, but as perpetrators. Yet in that moment, Elaine felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. The motorcade swept her away, sirens muted but lights flashing against the windows of the black SUV. She sat in silence, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the skyline shrinking behind her. The city's steel towers caught the late afternoon sun, gleaming gold. It should have been beautiful, but all she saw in the reflection of the glass was the shadow of what had just happened. By the time she reached Washington, the world already knew. The footage had spread across every platform, from TikTok clips with sarcastic captions to serious news coverage flashing banners that read, "Security Chief detained in racial profiling incident." Networks dissected every second of the video, commentators shouting over each other about what it meant. Some defended the officers, claiming they had only done their jobs. Others demanded accountability, justice, reform. And threaded through every conversation was a single, unignorable truth. If the Secretary of Homeland Security could be profiled like this, what chance did ordinary citizens have? Elaine walked into her office in the late evening. Her staff gathered like a storm around her. Their voices collided: legal briefings, political fallout, public outrage. One aide read from a tablet, her voice shaking. "The president wants a statement by morning. He's expecting you to address the nation." Elaine lowered herself into her chair, the leather cool against her back. She removed her glasses, rubbed her eyes. She could still feel the sting of the cuffs, the echo of laughter in that interrogation room. But beneath the fatigue, something fierce stirred. This was no longer just about her humiliation. It was about every black mother stopped on her way to work, every student searched at an airport, Every man pulled over for the crime of existing in his own skin. She spoke quietly, but the room fell silent. If I am silent now, then every hand that ever pressed against my people will press harder tomorrow. We're not just writing a statement. We're writing history. The night stretched long. Drafts were written and torn apart. Words were weighed like stones, each one carrying the potential to ignite or heal. Elaine insisted on authenticity, no sterile political jargon, no hollow promises. She wanted the country to hear the raw truth, not a polished performance. At 3 a.m, her staff finally looked at her with weary eyes and nodded. The speech was ready. The next day, the press room overflowed. Cameras clicked, microphones jutted forward, journalists elbowed for space. The world was watching. Elaine stepped to the podium, the seal of Homeland Security shining behind her, and for a moment the weight of the nation seemed to press on her shoulders. Yet her voice, when it came, was clear and steady. Yesterday, I was detained and handcuffed at an airport by officers who did not believe that a black woman could be the Secretary of Homeland Security. They did not see my credentials. They did not see my service. They saw only my skin. A murmur rippled through the room, but Elaine pressed on, her eyes locked on the cameras. What happened to me was not an isolated incident. It was not a mistake. It was a symptom of a disease that runs deep in our nation. A disease called racism, one that threatens the very security I was sworn to protect. If the highest office of Homeland Defense can be treated this way, then what happens to the ordinary citizens who cannot call for backup, who cannot summon headlines to their defense? Her words hung heavy, and the silence was almost reverent. She leaned closer to the microphone. This country cannot call itself secure until every person, regardless of color, can move freely without fear of humiliation or violence. Our borders mean nothing if our hearts are divided. Our security means nothing if prejudice patrols our airports, our streets, our schools. Her gaze swept the room, piercing the lenses, reaching into living rooms and offices across the nation. To the officers who detained me, I say this: I forgive you, but I will not excuse you. To every American who has been profiled, harassed, or silenced, I say this: I see you. And to those who believe this fight does not concern them, I say this: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We will face this disease together, or it will consume us all. The speech ended not with applause, but with a silence so thick it seemed to echo. Then, slowly, the reporters began to clap, not as journalists, but as citizens. Across the country, living rooms erupted with tears, shouts, arguments. The nation was shaken awake. But not everyone celebrated. Within hours, opposition voices sharpened their knives. Talk shows framed her as a political opportunist. Commentators sneered that she had exaggerated the incident for attention. Anonymous posts circulated online, calling her arrogant, untrustworthy, dangerous. The officers' union released a statement claiming their men had acted in good faith. The battle was only beginning. Elaine was not naive. She knew the machinery of denial would grind against her words. She knew she would be painted as both victim and villain. But she also knew the truth had been set free, and truth was hard to bury once the world had seen its face. Days turned into weeks. Protests erupted in airports nationwide, travelers carrying signs that read, "I am Elaine Porter, and flying while black is not a crime." Congressional hearings were scheduled, subpoenas issued, careers teetered on collapse. And through it all, Elaine remained composed, appearing on broadcasts, testifying before committees, her voice unwavering. But behind closed doors, the weight pressed harder. She lay awake at night, replaying the moment the officer smirked at her, the sting of being dismissed in her own country, the faces of her parents who had believed their sacrifices would buy a better future. She wondered if she had failed them, or if this was the proof that their struggle was not in vain. One evening, she sat alone in her office, the Capitol lights glowing outside her window. A letter lay open on her desk, written in shaky handwriting from a woman in Mississippi. "My son was stopped last year for walking home from school. They said he looked like someone they were looking for. He was 13. They pushed him on the ground, put their knee on his back. He cries when he hears sirens now. Thank you for telling the truth. Maybe now they'll listen." Elaine pressed the letter to her chest. Tears finally broke through the armor she had worn for weeks. It wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. She rose, wiped her face, and whispered to the empty room, "We keep going. For him. For all of them." Outside, the golden light of the city dimmed into night, but inside Elaine's resolve burned brighter than ever. The storm did not pause, it grew. Each day Elaine woke to another wave of headlines, another barrage of voices shouting for or against her. The video of her being led away in handcuffs replayed endlessly on television screens, in classrooms, on social media feeds. It had become a symbol larger than herself, a mirror in which the nation saw its ugliest truth and chose either to confront it or to look away. At first, the White House tried to stay quiet, issuing only a brief statement condemning the incident and promising a review. But silence could not hold against the roar of the people. Demonstrations swelled from airports to city halls, from college campuses to suburban streets. Chants echoed, "Justice for Elaine, justice for all." And yet, in the echo of hope, there was also venom. Hate groups seized the moment to spew bile, their rhetoric laced with the same old poison, dressed now in the costume of patriotism. Elaine found herself walking a knife's edge. She was still a cabinet secretary, responsible for safeguarding the nation against real threats: terrorist cells, cyber attacks, natural disasters. But she was also now a living emblem of a different kind of threat, the one within. Every meeting she attended carried double weight. Every word she spoke scrutinized for both policy and symbolism. One evening, she was summoned to a closed-door meeting at the Oval Office. The president, usually genial in public, looked tired and wary behind his desk. He gestured for her to sit. "Elaine," he began, his voice heavy, "this situation is spiraling. You've become the face of a movement, whether you wanted it or not. I respect what you've said, but I need you to be careful. The opposition is sharpening their knives. They'll try to turn this into a war we can't control." Elaine met his gaze steadily. "Mr. President, with all due respect, this is already a war. It's been a war for generations. It just finally made it to the front page." The president sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'm asking you not to escalate. We can push reforms quietly. We can negotiate. But I don't want to lose you, and I don't want to lose this administration to chaos." Her voice did not waver. "Sir, if quiet reform worked, we wouldn't be here. People are in the streets because whispers and backroom deals never protected them. If we don't face this openly, history will judge us as cowards." The conversation ended without resolution. Elaine walked out knowing she had spoken truth, but fearing the cost. Days later, the hearings began. In a vast chamber lined with marble and flags, the nation tuned in as officers testified, senators postured, and Elaine herself was called to the stand. She raised her right hand, swore the oath, and sat tall in the witness chair. Cameras captured every angle of her face, every flicker of emotion. The questions came sharp and loaded. Some senators demanded to know why she had not immediately identified herself, as if the fault were hers. Others grilled her on whether she thought all law enforcement was racist. The trap was obvious: to paint her as anti-police, to turn public sympathy into suspicion. Elaine answered with poise. "This is not about hating officers. It is about holding systems accountable. A system that allows prejudice to dictate action is broken. Good officers suffer under it just as citizens do. My duty is to fix what is broken, not to look away." When one senator sneered, "Are you suggesting that the officers who detained you are bigots?" she responded evenly. "I am saying they acted on bias, whether conscious or not. The evidence is in the bruises on my wrists and in the countless untold stories of citizens who do not have the privilege of this microphone." Her words rippled across the nation. Supporters cheered her courage. Critics accused her of grandstanding. But no one could deny the gravity of her presence. Meanwhile, the officers involved faced mounting scrutiny. Internal investigations revealed prior complaints, patterns of profiling, whispers that had been ignored until now. The union's defense grew weaker. Yet the backlash grew fiercer too. Death threats began to arrive at Elaine's office, letters scrawled with venom, emails dripping with hate. Security around her doubled. Still, she refused to hide. In public, she walked with her head high. At rallies, she spoke of unity, not vengeance. At universities, she told students that their voices mattered. At memorials for victims of racial violence, she stood with grieving families, holding hands, her silence as powerful as her speeches. But behind closed doors, fatigue clawed at her. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by the sound of cuffs clicking, by the smirk of an officer telling her she didn't belong. One night she sat in her kitchen long after midnight, the house dark except for a single lamp. Her brother, Marcus, called from Atlanta. "Elaine, you need to rest," he said gently. "You're carrying the weight of the world on your back." "I can't rest, Marcus. Not when I know what's out there. Not when I know kids are still being stopped, mothers are still being humiliated, fathers are still being buried." His voice cracked through the phone. "I'm proud of you, sis. But don't forget you're human. Even warriors need to breathe." Elaine closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her. He was right. Yet she also knew that warriors who paused too long often lost the battle. The breaking point came one afternoon when she visited a community center in Chicago. She had planned a quiet meeting with local leaders, but when word spread, crowds flooded the streets. People chanted her name, held signs with her image, begged her to run for higher office. In their eyes, she saw not just admiration but desperation. They were clinging to her as proof that change was possible. As she stood before them, golden sunlight cutting through the smog, illuminating her face, she realized the fight was no longer about survival. It was about transformation. The humiliation she had suffered was the seed of something far greater. She lifted the microphone, her voice rising above the chants. "This is not about me. This is about every one of you. About every traveler who deserves dignity, every child who deserves safety, every citizen who deserves equality. I cannot promise this will be easy. I cannot promise the hate will vanish overnight. But I can promise this. I will not stop fighting until justice is not a dream but a reality." The crowd roared, their voices echoing down the streets like thunder. In that moment, Elaine felt both terrified and alive. The movement had outgrown her, yet it needed her to lead. And she would. That night, as her plane lifted off back to D.C., she looked out the window at the sea of city lights below. They twinkled like stars trapped on Earth, fragile yet countless. She thought of her parents again, of the marches they had joined, the bruises they had endured, the hope they had clung to. Their daughter was now at the helm of a battle they had once only dreamed of winning. Elaine whispered into the hum of the engines, "I'm still here. We're still here." And for the first time since that day at the airport, she allowed herself a small, unguarded smile. The plane descended into Washington just before dawn. The horizon glowed with the first strokes of gold, a reminder that light always followed even the darkest night. Elaine pressed her forehead to the window, breathing in the quiet. Today, she knew, would change everything. By the time she arrived at her office, a storm was waiting. Reports covered her desk, drafts of new legislation, updates on protests, intelligence briefings warning of extremist chatter targeting her personally. Her aides buzzed around, their voices urgent, but Elaine held up a hand. "Clear the room," she said softly. They froze, exchanged looks, then obeyed. The door shut. For the first time in days, she sat alone, silence pressing against her like a heavy coat. She stared at the stack of papers. Reform proposals, draft bills, each one a possibility, a lifeline. Yet each one also fragile, waiting to be gutted by politics. Her mind churned with questions. How far could she push? How much could she risk? Was the nation ready for the truth? A knock came at the door. The president entered. No entourage, no cameras. He looked older than he had a week ago, the weight of crisis carved into his face. He lowered himself into the chair across from her, hands folded. "Elaine," he said quietly, "the country is at a tipping point. You've awakened something powerful. But power can destroy as easily as it can heal. We need to decide together how this ends." She studied him. For a moment, the weight of their offices dissolved, and they were simply two people trying to navigate a storm bigger than themselves. "It has to end with truth," Elaine said firmly. "Not compromise, not silence. Truth. The people won't accept anything less." He nodded slowly. "Then let's do it. Full-scale reform. But you need to be the face of it." The words hung heavy. She understood the risk. To stand at the front meant taking every bullet, every smear, every ounce of hatred. But she also understood the necessity. Change never came from the shadows. "I'll do it," she said. Within hours, the plan was set in motion. A sweeping package of reforms: mandatory anti-bias training, independent oversight committees, a national database of complaints, strict accountability for misconduct. It was ambitious, perhaps impossible, but it was real. The announcement came at noon, in the heart of the capital. Crowds filled the steps, cameras stretched to the horizon. Elaine stepped forward to the podium once more, sunlight cascading across her shoulders. She felt the air thrum with anticipation, fear, hope. "My fellow Americans," she began, her voice carrying across the plaza. "I stand before you not just as Secretary of Homeland Security, but as a citizen who has felt the sting of injustice firsthand. What happened to me was not quite was a mirror of what happens to countless others every day. But today, we turn that mirror into a window toward a future where dignity is not a privilege, but a right." She outlined the reforms, her words sharp yet hopeful. She did not shy away from the pain, but she painted a vision of possibility, a nation stronger because it faced its flaws. As she spoke, she saw faces in the crowd, black, white, brown, young, old, all lifted toward her. Some wept openly. Others held their children on their shoulders, pointing, whispering, "Remember this." When she finished, the applause did not erupt immediately. Instead, there was a silence, deep and profound, as if the nation was holding its breath. Then, like a dam breaking, cheers thundered, echoing through the marble pillars, across the city, into history. But the story did not end with applause. The weeks that followed were brutal. Opposition mounted, campaigns of misinformation spread like wildfire, threats doubled. Elaine became both hero and target, praised and vilified in equal measure. Yet she endured, her resolve unbroken. The reforms crawled through Congress, battered but alive. Some measures were stripped, others watered down, but the core remained. Change, real change, was moving. And every step was fueled by the memory of handcuffs on her wrists, by the cries of mothers, by the letter from the boy in Mississippi. One evening, exhausted, she walked alone through the quiet halls of the Capitol. The building hummed with history, its walls steeped in the voices of those who had fought before her. She paused by a window, golden light spilling across the floor. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe deeply, fully. Her phone buzzed. A message from her brother. "Saw the news. They passed it. You did it." She smiled, tears pricking her eyes. Not because the battle was over, it never truly would be, but because a door had been opened, and there was no closing it now. The next day, she visited an airport, the same kind of place where her ordeal had begun. Cameras were not invited. No press, no podiums. She walked quietly through the terminal, unnoticed by most travelers. She paused by a security line, watching officers work. One young officer caught her eye. He looked nervous, then nodded respectfully. No smirk, no suspicion, just acknowledgement. Elaine returned the nod, a silent exchange heavier than words. She knew it did not erase the past, but it hinted at a future worth fighting for. As she walked away, the sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, painting the floor in gold. She carried no handcuffs now, only the weight of history and the unshakable belief that change, though slow, was possible, because she had lived it, because she had survived it, because she had turned humiliation into hope, and hope into a weapon stronger than fear. And somewhere in that vast terminal, among the countless travelers moving forward, so too did the nation. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.